Welcome to Against the Tide, the podcast where extraordinary social change makers share their stories and their wisdom. Against the Tide is a celebration of courageous women who create lasting impact by daring to forge their own path. We'll dive deep into powerful themes such as the complexity of identity and how it influences the choices we make, embracing change even when it feels uncomfortable, and how breaking free from labels can unlock your true potential. Join me, Jo Metcalf, to hear stories of incredible women who, by swimming against the tide, prove that extraordinary things can happen. Welcome to what I know will be a brilliant episode of Against the Tide with Steph Taylor, CEO of Leeds Community Foundation. Steph, we've known each other for around 10 years, and during that time you've built a career across philanthropy, funding and social change. I've loved watching and learning from you, and particularly your leadership and passion for impact across all of these spaces. Let's get started with some of your background, if that's okay. You're clearly a purpose-driven leader. What shaped this sense of purpose?
If I think back to being younger, there's a couple of things that stand out really. So one, I went to a very diverse school. I lived in a very diverse community in Leeds. And I think I grew up thinking inclusion was normal and diversity was normal. And I saw around me people from all different backgrounds. I would go to houses where friends of mine had three siblings in a one-bedroom flat. I would go to houses to play where there were 8 bedrooms and it felt like a mansion. And I would spend time with people who ate very different food to me and had very different experiences to me. And that made me feel passionate that that's how life should be, I think. And seeing that thread throughout my career and following that thread has been a really important thing. I grew up in a relatively modest background. My family are all from Bradford, actually, but grew up in Leeds. My dad came here over to Leeds to work as a police officer, and my mum was a dinner lady. And I think being a police officer, having a dad as a police officer is quite an interesting way to grow up. He was kind of a Bobby on the beat in our local area. So in terms of class, I think research shows people tend to think of police officers they don't really know whether it's middle class or lower class. And I think that's really interesting itself because class is about perception and how you are perceived, but there's a kind of status to being a police officer, particularly in a community. And my dad was, as far as I can understand, very well respected in the community and worked very, very hard to build trust with people very different from him. So that was quite formative to see that, to be around somebody who had some degree of standing and privilege within the community, but also to be relatively kind of working class and to take that through my career and thinking, how do I make a difference?
And did he talk about his work at home, and did that shape you in any way?
Not really. It was more subtle than that. My dad was very protective of me, I suppose, being exposed to some of the things that he dealt with in his career. But he did talk to me about some of the different communities that he worked with and the different ways that he built trust. So that always felt important to me. And I suppose in subtle ways, both he and my grandma, who was a carer and a very important person in my life as a child and still is, although she lives now with dementia in a nursing home in Keighley. They both kind of showed me the importance of public service, I guess. My grandma was a head teacher, a carer. She worked her way up kind of in order to make money, but also to support people around her that she lived with in also a diverse community. So that's been there from a young age. My family, I think, expected me to do something in public service and also probably something relatively low level. I wasn't encouraged to go to university. It wasn't kind of what people in my family did. My gran did teacher training at night school when she was kind of in her 40s. So I guess seeing that was quite formative as well.
And what was it like having those strong women in your life at that point in time?
Just felt normal at the time, but now I look back and I'm older, I can see how much, particularly my grandma, shaped me, and the way that she centred me in decisions, thought about helping me develop what I was passionate about, and really, in lots of ways, provided for and supported all of the men around her. And, you know, I do that to an extent. I have some very supportive and enabling men around me now. But I think that was quite important in shaping a lot of my feminist values and the confidence that I have in the way I go about my life. I can kind of bring back to those very early days where it was me and my gran singing Mary Poppins songs and talking about how great life was as women.
Fantastic, yeah. When did you realise that your lived experience and background were not a disadvantage but an asset?
I think probably when I started taking up leadership roles, although I had a leadership role when I was very young, looking back, because I worked in a shop when I was 13 and I was put in charge of the shop because I was seen as being sensible by the owner and more sensible than the 16-year-old that worked there. And I think being an only child, pretty independent and having to make my own choices and wanting to make my own choices about what I did with my life really early was very formative. I would say realising, particularly in terms of my background, that was an asset came as I started to take up leadership roles within the charity sector and leadership roles within social purpose collaborations. Firstly, being from the background I am, the insight that I had into diversity and other cultures was really formative. I think also realising that there was a limit to how much I might progress or what I would be able to do because of that background came up a lot of times when I went for different jobs within the sector and when I tried different things. So to give you some examples, I worked for a national charity. I was at that point had become pretty successful. I was going for some leadership jobs that I was headhunted for. But when people in senior positions found out my background, i.e. that I was from Leeds, that I went to a comprehensive school, that I hadn't worked in the corridors of power of Westminster, I was told they were the reasons I wasn't being put forward for certain jobs. And I found that very frustrating because that was about what was on paper. I knew in the work that I did, actually, when I spoke to people in corridors of power and when I had opportunities to be in rooms where I could make a difference, that difference that I made was because of my background, because I could tell genuine stories about what life was like in communities, what people needed in terms of policy change, that had real compelling weight to them. And if I didn't have the background I had and I didn't have the perspective I had, I wouldn't be able to have that influence. But on paper, I was being stopped.
Interesting. So linking to that as well, what moments force you to choose between fitting in and staying true to yourself?
Gosh, well, I'd firstly say that is probably the central theme of my career and life, so it's a really good question, trying to maintain who I am and be authentic to who I am in any space that I'm in. The job I have now, and actually some of the previous jobs I've had as well, I've been really fortunate to be in some of the most amazing situations that would be perceived as hugely influential, and with people who make some of the most important decisions in the country in all sorts of ways. What's really important to me is being myself and bringing the experience I have in those conversations, and wherever possible, giving other people the opportunity and the platform to do that. One early experience I had that was vital in that was working with a young woman who had experience of unemployment. I was running a London-wide programme that was about finding the best ways to reduce long-term unemployment and see policy change in how the government addressed long-term youth unemployment. It was fantastic. I had a huge budget. I had all of the kind of assets available to me, really, that you would want to be able to make that happen across sectors. It was very exciting, and I had the ability to put young people at the centre of that. I had a steering group of young people that I handed money over to, I handed power over to. They did all sorts of things that would be perceived as very risky, but I wrapped the accountability around that because I trusted that those young people who'd been unemployed knew what needed to happen to change things for them. And one of the reasons I knew that was the first day in the job, I spoke to a young person and said, "What is it that stops you getting a job?" And she said, "Well, the thing is, I've never had a job. Nobody in my family has ever had a job. And yet I have to meet up with other young people that have also never had a job and also have families that have never had a job. How is that meant to make me learn how to get a job?" And that's when I really reflected on the power of diversity and lived experience, but also inclusion. Often we design services and we think about doing things in a way that addresses what we perceive as the problem, but doesn't build on the assets people have got, and doesn't allow people to genuinely come together and experience different ways of doing things and learn from each other. And that's what inclusion really is. It's about diversity singing and making the most of itself. And some of the young people that we worked with through that service had the most amazing careers and privilege. And I was told, you can't spend money about unemployed young people on those young people. But bringing them together through that process was what really allowed us to have the most fantastic outcomes that you couldn't buy through the normal statutory system for those young people.
Brilliant. And sort of back to the question around how do you hold on to that? Because you and I have been in spaces where we definitely don't feel like we fit in, and you can go one or two ways, can't you? You either sort of shrink in those scenarios or really sort of stand forward as yourself, and that can be uncomfortable. How do you manage that, and how do you deal with that?
Great question. Probably reflecting more than I do would help. I think so. Always holding it in mind, being as aware of it as you can, asking other people to make you accountable, talking about it. So I talk to a lot of people that I meet in my job about that being my mission and that being what I want to do, so that I open and I invite people to challenge me if I haven't done it. Taking risks, I suppose, in how you show up and what you perceive as important, and being trusted and doing what you've said you're going to do really matters. The reason I say that is often I'm in situations where I'm asked confidentially, because of the background I've got, the experience I've got, to nominate people to do things, to create platforms for people from different communities. I say I'm asked, usually I'm asked to do something myself. And what I say is, no, is this an opportunity for me to create that platform for somebody else that I trust, that I know is doing fantastic work in communities and that would never otherwise get this opportunity? A lot of those things happen behind closed doors. I wish they didn't. I wish I could talk about them. But I think it's more important, at least, that people who wouldn't otherwise get those opportunities to be in those positions of power, to be in those rooms, have them, and that I create those spaces for them. Some of them I can talk about. So an example would be, last year I was asked to speak at an international philanthropy conference about what it meant to do effective work in communities. And I said that I would do that, but I would do that if I could essentially support somebody from within one of our grassroots communities in Leeds to go and speak on that platform and be paid to do so and be compensated to do so and be given development support if they felt that was needed to be able to do that.
Yeah, fantastic. You've led some radical shifts in power dynamics at the organisations you've worked in. Can you give our listeners an example of when and how you've done this, building on some of the things that you've already said?
Yeah, so when I started working in philanthropy advice and working with people who have significant wealth, I started that job. I was fortunate enough, I suppose, to be headhunted for that job, and I went for the job and that was available. And the executive director spoke to me on the phone initially and asked me about my background, and I explained my background. This was after having had a fantastic conversation about what the job was and how I would do the job. Having explained my background, I was then asked the question, how would you have the gravitas to be able to work with people of significant wealth? And I was very taken aback by that question. I answered it the best way I could, which at the time I'm just even embarrassed to think about how I answered the question. And then I got a call a week later to say that they weren't going to take me forward for the role that they had available, and they would come back to me if they had a lower level job. Because they didn't think I was right for this particular role. I then took the lower level job, long story short, because I really wanted to use everything I'd learnt to create systemic change within how money flows into the sector and how people of wealth and privilege and major companies perceive what happens within communities. So I thought, well, you know, I've still got the ability to do that. That's my mission. This is a way in to be able to do that and to make that difference. And went in at a lower level. Long story short, kind of smashed all of the business development targets they'd ever had, and immediately got promoted and was sort of taking on significant responsibility for the impact framework for the whole global organisation. And that was because of my lack of gravitas, that I was able to operate in that way and be so successful. People really responded to my ability to tell stories about what it was really like to work in the charity sector, what it was really like to be in communities, stories that were not rooted in an Oxbridge background or an academic study of philanthropy or a conversation with government, but were rooted in the ability to bring connections together, think differently and see possibilities. So that systemic change, in a way, was, if I explain really what that looked like, it was getting government and major philanthropists and major companies to think differently about how they invested money in the charity sector. So we created huge streams of funding that were unrestricted and were flexible and allowed communities to spend the money in the way that they wanted. And you will know, Joe, and anybody listening who works in the charity sector will know, the way that government funds in particular, but actually the way that most funding still works, is very restricted for a community organisation, and it's based on a power dynamic that the person giving the money knows best. I'm always trying to flip that to say, no, the person receiving the money knows best if they are rooted in community and they are developing a solution to a problem, a way that an asset can be built on. And a lot of my career has been about trying to shift that power dynamic. And I've done that very successfully on a kind of national scale. And I am excited and delighted still 6 years on to be doing that in my hometown and to be creating a strategy where we are unlocking more flexible funding for communities, advising the people who give money to do that really, really well, and to do that with heart and to do that with trust. And that's what I then see transform the way people of wealth give that wealth away and feel about that wealth. And it is so much about feeling and perception, as things often are. And if you can break those perceptions down and you can help people see a different way of doing things, that's often the feedback I get is the thing that really mattered, not the money.
Yeah. I definitely see that through your work. So I think that's a fantastic explanation of sort of that power dynamic. It's a really interesting point you raise around gravitas. I've heard that many times, and I'd be intrigued with your thoughts around what does that mean and how should we be thinking about gravitas, particularly with the backgrounds that we've got?
It's a very gendered word, I think, gravitas. It's usually used in the context of men. I would say, I mean, for me, in that moment, I heard it as wealth speaks to wealth, money speaks to money. You know, if you've been in these circles, you can speak to people in these circles. And I think, or I hope it's a word that, you know, we stop hearing quite as much in relation to people and privilege and power. I want people to think there's someone we trust who knows what they're doing and has... I'd like people to know my values and what's important to me, and for that to come through in how I operate, and I try to make that the case as much as possible. I'm really mindful that sometimes as a chief executive and with the experiences that I've had and the connections I've got, being mindful of when and how I share power is really important. And sometimes it is right for me to be the person that speaks on a platform. It's not right to immediately introduce somebody who may have a different background or experience or be far away from the experience of the person I'm talking to. I think I've learned to judge that very well, and when and how to land those conversations and connections so they can have the most impact.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And how do you hold your nerve when you're challenging the status quo in those types of situations as well?
I think trusting the experiences that I've had and the things that I've learned, the brilliant allies that I've got alongside me and that I've tried to be to different people over my career. One of the things I feel so grateful for is the diversity of work that I've done. Having worked across the corporate, public and charity sector in almost all my roles to bring people together from different backgrounds to create social change, I've got a really well-rounded view, and I really hold that very strongly. That gives me a lot of confidence in my opinions and the things that I'm trying to achieve. The other thing is, I've learned in my career, I suppose, that the biggest barrier I face in a way is people understanding quickly that what I'm trying to achieve, it genuinely isn't about me. And that's quite a difficult thing to get across. So if I'm trying to progress something, if I'm trying to build something, a lot of the work I do in my role currently, for example, with the local authority, with other partners, is about what will create the best conditions for communities in Leeds. My work is about that. It's not about me, but it's quite hard to get that across quickly. But that's where I get my confidence from, because I'm not trying to push something in a particular direction. I'm trying to do the best thing by my mission, is the only way I can describe it. And that feels very, very real to me. And it isn't about mission, Steph. It's about, in this case, a Fairer Leeds. The work I do in Bradford is about a Fairer Bradford, and I connect with and can see the impact that, that there will be on communities if we bring people together to do their funding in the way that's going to make the most difference. And that's what keeps me going, and that's what gives me the confidence to be in any space that I'm, able to be in or can push myself in too.
Definitely, and that's why I love working with you. And I think what you describe in there for me is how I start to think about system leadership, around this sense that we're in something together to try and create change. And I've noticed, even when I'm trying to do things that are either pro bono or paid contracts, where you're trying to really push and challenge that status quo, people are very suspicious, aren't they? Do you get that?
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And people are very suspicious. Their assumption is that I'm trying to further something for my own career. Of course I am, in the sense that I want to be successful at what I do, but I don't have a particular end goal in mind. It's kind of, how do I use everything I've learned and the connections I've got and the person I am and the people I know to do the best possible for this city. And that's what motivates me every day. But yeah, there's a lot of suspicion. I find it difficult to, I suppose, I trust people really, really quickly. And one of the things I'm trying to get better at is not assuming people come from the same value set as me, and still finding a way to work with people when they don't. Or going, actually, do you know, I can't work with this person because they don't have that value set, and that's cool, but actually this isn't really going to get anywhere, and it would be amazing if this person or this organisation was involved, and maybe they need to be, but let's find a way, if it really isn't going to work and the values aren't aligned, where that's out the way.
Yeah, really interesting. You've mentioned trust quite a lot. How do you, through your work, build trust?
Listening, doing what I've said I'm going to do. So I try really hard to work with full accountability, but as little ego as possible. And that is really important to me, because the accountability piece is everything. I do have a huge amount of power and privilege, and have, despite my background, have grown up with a lot more power and privilege than a lot of people. And I'm really mindful of that, and how I use that to have the most impact possible for people who don't have the platform and privilege that I've got. meeting people where they're at. Sounds quite cliche, but that's how I've always worked ever since I was a youth worker. It's important to me to go to where people are, to show them that I'm interested, to not make assumptions about people. I try to work in a way that is authentic. I don't promise to do things I'm not able to do. I'm as open as I possibly can be about what's going on with people. Try not to do things behind closed doors unless there's a really good reason for that, because I know there's a greater good about where that work's going to get to on behalf of communities. I think we have to be realistic about the fact that perceptions are everything. So how people perceive me and whether they trust me or not will have implications as we speak behind the scenes. So I've also got to not worry too much about that and let it drag me down in how I go about my daily life, or I wouldn't get anything done.
Yeah. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I find having the background that we've got enables trust a bit easier, because you're not coming in with that ego, and you are not coming from I know you've got a place of privilege now, but your background isn't, and that is deeply rooted, isn't it, often? So yeah, that really resonates.
I think so, although I think that works with communities. What's interesting is going back to that idea of gravitas and the experiences I've had where opportunities have not been given to me, and I've been fed back very clearly they've not been given to me because I don't have a background of wealth and privilege. What am I missing out on? What more could I have achieved? What more could I have done? It's interesting. I recently saw a job advert that I sent on to a friend for a chief executive role at a big funder, and it said must have experience of working in or with government and walking the corridors of power. And I thought, thank goodness they've actually admitted that, because fair play, if that's a really important part of the job, say that up front. Whereas the experiences that people have getting to the very end of a process and then going, but we're not quite sure you can talk the talk, or you've got the existing networks, and it's really important, just waste people's time.
Yeah, definitely. So psychologist and former guest Isabel Fielding says that around 90% of us experience imposter thoughts. Why don't you?
I do get really nervous, and those nerves are because I care. That's what I always tell myself. It's because I care about the outcome, and I know and I understand enough about the way systems work and the way power and privilege works to know that if I mess up, I'm messing up on behalf of Sanjida, who I saw the other day in Holbeck, who set up an amazing project for women who experience domestic violence. If I mess up, I've messed up her chances of receiving funding and being part of a system that creates change for women who've experienced domestic violence. It's that big. But to me, I don't therefore experience imposter syndrome, really, because it's not about me. It's about the work that I'm trying to do and what I achieve, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You talked earlier about not always feeling like you belonged. Have there been moments where you've questioned whether you belonged in rooms you were in? What helped you stay in those rooms as well?
Do you know what? I don't question it now, ever. When I was younger, earlier stages in my career, I had some experiences that I suppose looking back were kind of quite crazy. So, for example, because I was doing this really innovative work around youth employment, and I had some fantastic people on my board that had great positions of privilege and power, they put me forward to be part of the Centre for Social Justice's work on youth unemployment, and I was with peers and government ministers and CEOs of charities when I was quite young and quite junior. And being in that room initially was terrifying. But I realised very quickly that if you are speaking authentically about what you know, that gives you a power and it gives you a cachet that people who haven't had that experiences, they like it, they can hear it. And sometimes I would think, gosh, I'm just saying what to me are really, really basic things. but you can't underestimate the power of what you know if you know it. You know. And I always say this to people when they worry about public speaking: you know so much more about you and about what you're talking about than anybody else, and that you have to find confidence in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there must be lots of risk within what you do, and balancing that risk, balancing the power and all those challenges that you've talked about. Is there anything that you want to share with our listeners around managing that risk and power and balancing it all?
Huge risk. I mean, I think risk is a really interesting word in the charity sector, and it goes back to some of what we were talking about around unrestricted funding and how you change systems, because so much of that is how people perceive risk and what is risky. If I give a grant to an organisation working in communities and they don't spend it on what they said they were going to spend it on, you know, what's the risk? And some of that is about the story that you tell around what that money's there to achieve and what it's going to do. So I think about risk in all sorts of different ways all the time. There are lots of times in my career when I have taken a risk and done that because I know ultimately I can probably ride that risk through in a way that somebody else wouldn't be able to, that didn't have the connections and the power and the privilege that I've got. A classic example would be during COVID, when I'd first started at Leeds Community Foundation, and we were given some money that we were told to spend in a particular way. And I knew from all the listening work that we did quickly at the beginning of COVID that wasn't going to land with communities, and they wouldn't be able to solve the issues that they could see in front of them if I did that. So I ignored what I was told by some very important stakeholders, and I found a way to make that work. And actually I influenced back, so they gave the money out in the way that I had given it out locally, nationally, 3 months later. But that takes, you know, the confidence to have worked in lots of different settings and done lots of different things to come in and do, and the backing of fantastic people around you and your board that kind of allow you to do that in my context.
And have you got any early examples that you want to give around what gave you that confidence?
So I've always volunteered. I've always had positions of responsibility, from, you know, being 16 and running a convenience store with, you know, people of all ages that I was in charge of managing. So I've had lots of experiences where I've been able to test out my leadership skills. When I first started in the charity sector, I worked at a large charity, £50 million turnover. I was given my first senior leadership role, and within a week I realised I'd done something that I absolutely shouldn't have done. With a major contract, I'd basically bought loads of IT equipment that the contract with the government said you weren't allowed to do. So I rang my boss, new boss at the time, first week, and said to him, I'm really sorry, you're going to have to sack me already. And he said, look, don't tell me what's happened. It's Friday. Take the weekend to think about it. It won't be as bad as you think. And if you haven't worked it out on Monday, we'll solve it together. And I'm 99.9% sure I won't have to sack you.
Brilliant.
And that you know, that trust that was instilled in me, not knowing me at all at that stage really, was really, really formative, and it's completely changed how I thought about what trust is and how you can give it away straight away. And that's what I tried to do. And particularly when I manage people, I lead teams, I work with partners, I want to start from that principle of, you know, I trust you, let's enable you, let's get this done. And it was massive for me, because actually I did solve the problem. I solved it in a very creative and unusual way, and I used my network in a very creative and unusual way to solve it, which I've also done ever since as well, which, by the way, was to like change it to a hire purchase agreement, which my father-in-law at the time suggested as a used car salesman, that's what I should do, which was genius. And it ended up costing a lot more money, but that's how government contracts often work. And, you know, I went on to then win the trust of my team, who thought, yes, this is brilliant, because actually they'd been involved in creating the situation in the first place. And yeah, that was pretty big.
Yeah, I bet you didn't sleep that weekend.
Not at all.
What would you say to a woman who feels she doesn't belong in rooms that we've talked about?
Honestly, I'd say in some cases you don't. Don't be really clear and intentional about why you want to be in that room, because half the time what happens in rooms that you think you should be in is can I say bullshit? Like it's not, it's not what you think it is. Create your own rooms, and find allies. If somebody wants to help you, trust that they do want to help you, and be in those spaces. And just be really intentional about what it is you're trying to achieve.
Amazing. You've achieved so many things, but what would you tell your younger self now?
I would tell myself that there are so many different ways to make a difference, to have an impact, which is what I grew up wanting to do for other people. It doesn't have to be through the charity sector. If you have power and privilege, give it away as much as you can. That's ultimately what philanthropy is. That's why I love it, and I think the process of doing that is as important to people as the end result often. So surround yourself by good people and work out how to make a difference in whatever way that means to you.
Amazing. That really definitely sings to me. So what's your hopes for the future of philanthropy?
Oh, that more people do it. So I'm doing some work with, as part of the Leeds Ambitions in the city, with colleagues across the city to develop a philanthropy strategy, which is basically about encouraging more people to do philanthropy, to do it locally, to do it in a timely way, to do it well. Partly because the money matters, but as we've talked about, the experience is incredibly rewarding as well. It's a real privilege to spend time with and do things different to your day-to-day life and your experience, and I'm really passionate about that, and as many people as possible having that different set of experiences for them and for their children. I would love there to be nationally more philanthropy done close to communities. I mean, one of the reasons I moved to work at the Community Foundation from doing national and international work was that I really believe people who are working at the grassroots in communities, that live in those communities, that know those communities, that have been there for tens of years, hundreds of years, generations, they know what's needed, and being able to channel money and investment and time and skill into those communities in a thoughtful, mindful, respectful way is everything. So more philanthropy that does that, enables that and supports that would be fantastic.
Very powerful. If people are listening and want to engage, depending whether that's a community group or somebody with wealth and privilege and power, how can they get involved with Leeds Community Foundation and yourself? Yeah,
talk to me. I love talking to people who are interested in supporting work across Leeds to make it a fairer place, whether they've got money that they want to invest into communities, whether they can use that money in communities to make change and make people's lives better. I would like to know them. So if you're out there, get in touch. We have a website, Leeds Community Foundation. We also have a website for Give Bradford, which I'm responsible for as a separate charity, doing exactly the same fantastic stuff in Bradford. And there are community foundations all across the UK. So whatever your postcode, you can find somebody like me who knows about their place, is an expert in giving in their place, and can help you do that really well.
Fantastic. Any final things you want to say before I do a bit of a closing?
So I think we have to recognise not just the reality, but the perception of social class is inescapable. And in government and civil society, lots of senior roles are filled by people who are at ease with power and can speak the language of power and privilege. And these things are often subtle, but I have seen time and again that they are there. But there's a real cost to that perception, whether it's described as gravitas, whether it's looking at somebody's CV and seeing that they went to Oxbridge, whatever the shortcut is to power and privilege, it stops voices being heard, and particularly non-white voices, people from other marginalised communities. And I've been really successful at making my voice heard, I think, because of the confidence that I had from an early age that, if you do the right thing and you work hard, you gain other people's respect. I see that very much as reflecting the social class that I come from, however I would describe that social class. And people from other backgrounds need that confidence. So a lot of what I do is try to help people from other backgrounds build that confidence, give them opportunities to step into their power. And ultimately, we have to recognise that power and privilege will always carry weight. So we need to create it for people that don't have it, as well as work to dismantle it and get rid of it.
Amazing. What a way to finish. Steph, it's been a pleasure getting to know you over the years, and I class it as a huge privilege to remain a friend, colleague, whatever we call this relationship. But thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you, and thank you for
stories,
supporting our work and everything we do, Jo, and for doing this, giving all sorts of different people a voice through the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to Against the Tide, brought to you by Jo Metcalfe and Louise Kavanagh. We're grateful to the team at Sticks and Glass in Leeds and Bison Studios in London, our inspiring guests and wonderful listeners. Subscribe to Against the Tide wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode.